Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
According to the police officer I spoke to, they went through a list of questions in order to ascertain whether or not she was safe and determined that she was okay to be on her own on the streets of Victoria barefoot in November, and they left her there. That was the last time anyone ever saw her.
You are listening to Emma Fillipoff is Missing, a series by the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners. In tonight's episode, I have something that I know is going to be very interesting to a lot of you. One of my most common requests or recommendations from listeners is new episodes and new coverage related to the disappearance of Emma Fillipoff. So far, the show has completed a 9-part series examining the details surrounding her disappearance and the factors that may or may not have led to it. Well, tonight, I have a lot more information that I think people following this case are going to want to hear. We're going to be joined initially by my friend Tyler Hooper, who hosts a podcast called Missing and Unexplained. Tyler and I are going to listen to, discuss, and break down a previously unaired interview with one of the residents of the women's shelter that Emma lived in shortly before her disappearance. People following this case may not know a lot about this woman, however they've likely heard about her as she was seen chasing Emma out of the women's shelter shortly before Emma was last seen. That interaction and what led to it, up until now, has been largely unknown by the public. But that's going to change tonight, because we're going to hear directly from Patty, and Tyler and I are going to discuss what we hear. So let's get to it. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, my guest Tyler Hooper and I will discuss Emma Fillipoff's life in the shelter, as told to me by shelter resident Patty. Tyler Hooper, we're back to the band is back together. How you doing over there?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to be here with you, Jordan. Thanks for inviting me.
No, this is good. I couldn't think of a better way to spend I don't know what night of the week it is. Is this Thursday?
Thursday. Yeah, the 9 to 5 soldier over here knows that it's Thursday. Yeah, Friday's right around the corner.
I've lost track of what day of the week it is, and in some cases even what time of day it is ever since the pandemic started. You're surviving, I guess. You look good. The pandemic's treating you all right?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could travel and do some more things. My wine and beer intake has probably gone up a little bit, with boredom. But yeah, I got to say, I don't have it too bad compared to a lot of other people. So yeah, it's going pretty good.
You've been a busy guy. So you have your show initially. Your podcast was a podcast for the missing. You've recently rebranded, and now just simply the Missing and Unexplained podcast, which I think is better. It doesn't have podcast in the title.
Yeah, I mean, and it does, but kind of you can drop it. You can just call it the Missing and Unexplained. Yeah, so I mean, my podcast is still, the mandate's not really changing. It's still going to be heavy on missing persons. It's going to be narrative. It's going to be in depth. But I've got a few ideas. We were talking just before the show started that, I've got this one idea for kind of Halloween this year that I want to do that isn't really that missing persons heavy. It's more folklore. And so rather than start a whole new podcast and have that stress, I just thought, let's rebrand a little bit, open the parameters up, and then down the road there can be some more diverse content. So it's a slight rebranding. It's as you've been doing this for so long, and I'm new to it. You learn things along the way, and you got to adjust, right? So. Yeah,
and the name is important. Since the very beginning, I've kind of kicked myself for choosing nighttime because it's not descriptive, so it doesn't give people any indication of what they're tuning into, and it's also very generic. So when you search nighttime and stuff, there's so much other stuff that would come up. But when I chose my name, it was simply, this was what I was doing during the evenings. My kid would go to sleep, and I'd be, just there on my laptop, and I just called it my nighttime podcast because I only worked on it at the nighttime, and it just stuck. But yeah, if I could go back in time, maybe I would have thought of something different. But no, I think what you're doing and having more room to kind of do different stuff, that's only going to benefit you. Like, I know you more from like the writing side of things, because your articles with Vice and stuff, it's like your version or your style of storytelling and the type of journalism you do is just so on point that whether it's a missing persons case or whatever you choose to cover is going to be awesome. So the way I see it is giving you a bigger sandbox of genres or types of stories.
I also want to say thank you for helping me on this podcast journey, because it's been a huge adjustment, and the countless Facebook messages we've gone back and forth with the advice has been really helpful. And the rebranding was something you kind of said, if you're going to do it now. So I took your advice. And for the record, I love the name Nighttime. Like, I don't know why you'd ever change it, but that's just me.
But one thing we have in common as far as coverage is we both spent a considerable amount of time researching and learning about Emma Fillipoff and the circumstances that surround her disappearance. I did my series of podcast episodes about her, which connected me with you when you were doing your amazing Vice.com, Vice Canada piece about Emma. Yep. How long ago was it that you wrote that? I feel like it was like yesterday, but I'm sure years have passed.
I wish I had looked that up before we did this. I think it was 2017. I want to say it was like the 7th or 8th year anniversary, I think. Okay. And then I've been on your podcast a couple of times before to talk about the case. So that's kind of my claim to fame now, is that I know you.
Hopefully something more exciting happens. So we both, we've talked about this case a lot. We have similar feelings about a lot of the aspects. And one thing I've always said, and I know we've talked about this before, is a part of Emma's life that was really a mystery to me, and something that I just wasn't able to get good information on, is things that happened to her in the days immediately preceding her disappearance. When I put together the collection of episodes, I managed to talk to a lot of friends and her mom, and I kind of followed a chronological order that brought me right up to like a month before she disappeared, for the most part. Like, I was talking to, if you remember, her friend Connor, who had the boat.
Yes.
And her friend Micah, who saw her just a couple days before she disappeared.
Yes.
These people mainly were closely associated with her, ending about a month before she disappeared. And everything we know about her, kind of her last days or weeks even, is mainly like second and third hand. A lot of what I know about that period of her life comes from Shelley, Emma's mom, recounting things that she managed to learn from employees of the shelter, and various people sharing, these brief encounters they had with Emma. But I really, from the beginning, when I was putting together my series, I wanted to have someone who was right there tell the story. Preferably, it was going to be Dennis Quay, the young man who who called police on and reported Emma as being, erratic. I tried to get in touch with him, and I wasn't able to make that happen. But there was another person that from very early on I wanted to talk to, and that is what we're going to get into tonight. I'm
excited.
Literally after years of trying, I managed to connect with and do an interview with one of the women who lived at the shelter with Emma, and became quite close with Emma right up to her disappearance, including a really kind of wild story you're going to hear her tell of something that happened the day Emma went missing. So it's a little intense, some of the stuff we'll get into. But before we do, let's just talk a bit about the person we're going to hear from. We'll call her Patty. I believe that's her real name, but that's at least what she wants to go by for this purpose. I've seen her referred to as several names, and I guess in the context of Emma's story, she comes up most often where people say and often share the story of just hours before Emma disappeared, she went back to the women's shelter that she was staying at, the Sandi Merriman Women's Shelter, had some kind of incident that led to Emma running out of the building with another resident of the women's shelter chasing after her. I'm sure you've heard that story 100 times.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So what I'm getting at is that woman who chased her was Patty. what, like, before who we're going to hear from, but before this, like, did you know anything about Patty or know anything about her story other than the fact that she seemed to chase Emma out of the shelter?
Well, it's funny, Jordan. You give me a lot of credit for my in-depth journalism pieces, and I kind of feel like you outgot me here with the source, because I knew that she had been at a woman's shelter, and I knew about that night, but I was never able to, like, no one from the shelter would talk to me. I wasn't able to track down anyone. So when you told me that you'd found this person and that I've known about this for a while, as you've messaged me the frustration of her not wanting to talk for a while. I knew that they existed, but I wasn't able to get them. So kudos to you. And that's why I'm so excited to be here, because I think it is, if anything, it's a very integral part of the circumstances and time leading up to Emma going missing. It's within that 24-hour time frame. And the shelter, in a lot of ways, is a bit of a mystery. And, a lot of it is shrouded in privacy, which makes sense for a shelter. But it's also, it's interesting to get some context to what happened that night, because, as you say, Emma was seemingly behaving very erratically in some ways.
Yeah. And again, it's like, to try to understand or theorize on what may have happened to Emma, like, I feel like we really need to know about that day, and it's hard to do it when what you're in with the stories that we're getting often being so far removed from the people telling them. It just, like, I've always really wanted to understand what was going on with her that day, that night, clarify things like, did she know her mother was coming? And before Shelley arrived and before she went missing, because that's just been, I've never really been able to get a straight answer on a lot of these facts, and that's what we're going to clear up. But before we meet Patty, let me tell you that the background story to this interview honestly could be its own, like, 2 or 3 part series. I've never had someone, I'm not even exaggerating, I've never had someone dislike me more than Patty did for a period of time. And I mean venomous hatred. It went from, and I'm not even exaggerating, it went from initially, like, yes, I'll talk to you. This is years ago. Yes, I'll talk to you. I'm in the middle of moving, a little later. And it slowly kind of got pushed back. And eventually it was like, I can't do it. It's not going to happen. But then recently, over the last month or so, we reconnected. But the reconnection was mainly Patty telling me, and I guess by talking to me, she was also talking to everybody who's ever covered Emma's case and gave the opinion that Emma was mentally ill. She basically was saying, like, you are the scum of the earth, you're liars. She went as far as to say if I disappeared, she would support whoever was involved in that having happened.
Wow.
Yeah, so
it's... Can I ask a question, though? Because this is something we actually haven't talked about. Where do you think that hatred comes from? Because we talk about how you approach people and how I approach people, and I don't think you're particularly intrusive or demanding. You're always like, hey, if you want to come on and talk, come on the show. So where do you think that stems from? What I've come to realize, so it was venomous. Like, again, like, if you're a liar, you're a scum of the earth, you're lying about Emma, all this stuff. And what I've come to learn is that Patty, she was really upset about collectively the coverage Emma's case got by people like, the documentaries, the random people on YouTube. I was lumped in with that. So what I've realized, and after we got over the fight, I guess we can call it, is she was taking out a lot of the frustration she had with all of that with me. Eventually, like, these, like, really intense, aggressive kind of attacks that she was sending, eventually we just kind of got past it. And I was like, I know you don't like me and you don't like my, my episodes, but I just really want to hear your side of the story. And then eventually we just found the common ground of, like, we both want the story out there as truthfully as possible. And, it was all of a sudden we were, like, communicating well, and it's like, yeah, you can call me anytime. And I called her, we had a great chat, and I did an hour, close to a 2-hour long interview with Patty. But we're only going to hear probably a half hour of it. There's a lot that I took out for a few reasons. One is
Patty has a very thick Spanish accent.
Yes.
Some parts were a bit hard, like especially when she really got excited and was talking fast. Some parts were a little hard to make out. Also, she suffers from obsessive compulsive personality disorder, OCPD, and when Patty talks, she kind of like she'll follow a certain thread of thought, and sometimes it will take her off topic. So there was parts of the interview that I took out for that reason. We would be talking about life in the women's shelter, but all of a sudden it would lead her on a long tangent about something, that's semi-related. So anyway, I managed to take that interview and trim it down and separate it into kind of its main components. And so what we're going to do today is go through kind of the key parts of Patty's story as it relates to meeting Emma, life in the shelter, and ultimately ending with Emma running out of the women's shelter, which is something that, again, people have talked about, but I have never heard a firsthand account of it. You ready to get into this?
Absolutely. Yeah. That whole introduction, I've got goosebumps. So yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. And of course I had mentioned there was a lot of nasty stuff, but none of that made its way into the interview. When you listen to the clips I'm going to play, Patty and I hit it off great. We sound like old friends.
That's awesome.
But it does start with an apology. So let's meet Patty. Hi, Patty.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
This is like returning back to a lot of things.
Yeah. Well,
So I publicly want to apologize for insulting you yesterday so much.
That's okay. I have a what they call a thick skin, and I know that I know it wasn't anything personal. It's this is a sensitive story and a sensitive topic.
I was really insulting you. Well, I was very upset because I find some people they're doing videos about Emma, and I got to you. That's how and again, but you know me from a long time ago already, actually.
Yeah, we've spoke before a few years ago when I was really researching Emma's story. I tried to contact you, but I think at that point you were just in the middle of moving. I believe there was something going on.
Wow.
So that's kind of how it started, but she didn't have to apologize. It's a sensitive topic, and if some random person is writing you on the internet about like your friend who went missing, I think you reserve the right to tell them to go F themselves, and
that's why I was laughing. Like the way she did that was so open and honest. Like she didn't sugarcoat it. She's like, I was insulting you, like, and so there's probably a lot of emotion behind that, and her having actually known Emma and met her, it's probably very, very much a charged subject for her. I think you handled that really well, though.
Yeah, and it's what I've learned is she's a very open person who is like, you meet those people and they don't have a filter. They just jump in and they're saying stuff. Mm-hmm. She's kind of that's her vibe. I could see when you get to hear more of her, you will see why she was able to connect with Emma so well, because she's quite like poetic and artistic. Patty is in kind of the way she describes everything and the way she gets into life. I think what we'll do next, I'll play a bit more of Patty. We'll hear the story of how she ended up in the shelter with Emma, because that's where they meet back in 2012. Patty was living in the Sandi Merriman shelter before Emma arrived.
Right.
Patty told me the story of how she ended up there.
Okay, let's hear it.
I know you're not originally from Victoria. How did you end up in Victoria back then? What brought you to Victoria?
Well, my husband is from Canada. Our children are half Canadian, half Spanish. Ended up in the shelter because he already had a car accident, so he had something in the mind to like distortions. I called the Ministry of Children to help me because the father was saying certain things. And then the father, he acted like a gentleman. So they took the children away from me and gave it to him. For this 6 months period, when I was in the shelter, and I went, later they took it from him because they realized from many people that he's not a bad person. He just had a car accident, and David would be normal, and then he would have what they call it, an episode every 6 months, something like this, right? A beautiful man, normal, right? My family on that time was not like, oh, just get back together or just try to solve it.
Yeah, I mean, that I'm glad you included that, because I think it really gives you a sense of where she's coming from in her situation as well, which I think is so important because, you know, as we are probably going to find out, she ended up at the shelter as well. So Jordan, I think that was really great. And I'm glad she told you that. Very, very sad. Very sad.
Yeah. And I think it paints a picture that isn't immediately apparent to everyone. When I think of like
Absolutely.
a homeless shelter, I'm thinking of like transients and drugs and, you know, all this seedy stuff. But Sandi Merriman is primarily, it's a women's shelter, just women.
Yes.
And Patty had explained, we'll hear more about life in the shelter, but I'm sure a lot of the women there end up there as relationships fall apart, or, you know, to escape abusive partners and stuff. So I don't think it's what will immediately come into someone's mind when they think Emma was living in a women's shelter or a homeless shelter, to try to think of, you know, when they imagine what life was like there. But as you heard Patty describe, she, from Spain, came to Canada. She was living here with her boyfriend or husband. They had children. He had mental health problems, and that will come up multiple times as you hear us talk, because when Emma was having problems, Patty was often thinking back to how she dealt with her husband. Their relationship fell apart. The kids were taken into some kind of care or custody or whatnot. Right. Patty, without anywhere to go, a Spanish woman living in Victoria, found somewhere the Sandi Merriman Women's Shelter, and that was where she stayed for a good period of time, in and around like exactly when Emma was there. So let's learn a bit more about life in the shelter, because that's something that, again, people following Emma's story, we often hear of her being in the Sandi Merriman shelter. Very rarely do we hear anything about what it's like in that shelter. And fortunately, I think a lot of people listening may not have had the experience of having to turn to a women's shelter for a residence. So let's hear a bit about it.
Let's do it.
First of all, the Sandi Merriman was donated from a drug addict woman that owned that house.
Okay.
To the government to shelter women, because she already sheltered women. She was a very friendly woman, and so I was really like, oh my God, like coming from Spain, like really. In Spain, you work or you die.
Yeah.
Basically.
Okay.
That's it. Like that's it in Spain. Like in many countries, the shelters, they are shelters, but not like this. Mm-hmm. Some women live there 2 years, coming in and out.
Oh wow. Okay.
Like in the attic is the woman that sleep in the night, the women that are not insulting or that, and they want to recover, get another job. I was thinking after talking to you that all the women in St. Merriman, you know, we might have whatever, many reasons, mental illness, drug addiction, severe mental illness, whatever, can be many reasons, but we all have one thing in common, and that's bad relationship with men. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Okay.
So, maybe because of all this, or whatever reason, it's always that giggling of female gossiping in the attic, because the ladies in Canada are so nice. You know, they're so nice. Like that shelter, people that have really problems with whatever their attitude, But in the attic, you had that jolly feeling when somebody came, so they feel at home and talking what happened to you. And they were really open, you know.
Wow, what an interesting perspective. Like, because, you know, how often do you hear a woman's perspective about what it's like and why they end up in a shelter? And to hear her, like, obviously with English being, you know, a second or maybe even a third language, I'm not sure, explain that pretty articulately is really impressive. And you can really tell. We know what strikes me the most, Jordan, right away, is that you don't get I know maybe she was very judgmental of you, but you don't get the sense that Patty was very judgmental of Emma or women in the shelter. Like, very understanding that we all come from different walks of life. I mean, she's an immigrant, Emma was not, and she's able to kind of break that down and almost disassociate it in her mind a little bit. And I think that's really telling. It seems like she would have been someone like Emma, who's a bit more open-minded about certain things, probably would have approached. Did that strike you?
Oh, absolutely. She seems like a very open-minded, accepting, you know, live and let live type of person. And yeah, and she talks a lot about, we heard just a short clip there, but she spoke a lot about the different women she met and the different staff and the certain, like, the personal problems that they were dealing with, and, you know, the problems that the staff had to deal with, and how everyone was just, you know, trying to make the best of that situation. It was nice to hear. And again, I can, like, as I'm hearing it, I'm also thinking about it in the context of that's where Emma's turning. And when we hear Patty describe the women's shelter, what was important to me is there's different levels of the building, and it seemed like the attic is kind of where the more stable and I guess social kind of group ended up, and that is where Patty stayed, and Emma's bed was right next to Patty's. So in this attic area where there was less women, but more so the stable ones, they would stay up, you know, late at night talking, and, you know, where are you from? How did you end up here? You know, that sort of thing. And I can just see Patty really being someone that Emma would be. What I know about Emma, this seems like the type of person that she'd be like, okay, this is, you know, my kind of person.
Well, maybe feeling safe enough to do that. You know, we know one of the things we know about Emma is that she was a very private person about her personal life. So I'm sure having these women, including Patty, you know, sharing and that camaraderie happening is probably a good venue for her to open up a little bit about her own situation. So this is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, let's get to how Patty came to meet Emma, because this is also a very cool story.
Okay, first of all, Emma is not a girl that goes into shelters like all her life. I was first in the shelter. She was the most educated girl, maybe not only the shelter, but Victoria. Like she never hung out with the homeless in the streets. People come from Canada to smoke meth, and they're in the streets because of the weather. It's a nice weather. So, and I've never seen Emma. She would never be with anyone, basically. That's from the shelter. She was very shy. She was the proper girl that is very, like, conservative, you know, like she has her life, you have yours, you know, like those are private things. And she wouldn't say that, but, you know, it's like, I guess would be ashamed to just say it, coming from where she's coming from. So I spoke about my life, and I was really, really, like, trying to make her see or laugh about my situations. Maybe she tells me, and I do remember very well that she was coming because I asked Emma, why are you here? I don't remember. She said her boyfriend or I think it was her boyfriend, but someone was stalking her and made her stop. So that way she had to stop working, and she came. I don't think she said stalking, but it was bothering her. I don't remember the words. I think she said my boyfriend, or I wish I remember well.
Mm-hmm. But it had something to do with a guy that she had a bad relationship in some context.
I think it was. She said it was her boyfriend was following her and bothering her, and she had to stop working.
Wow.
She was there because of that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. The police must have access to the files because they asked us why we come in the shelter.
And what kind of relationship did you have with Emma? So you mentioned you were like in the attic. It seemed like more mature kind of women living there and more stable. You met Emma there. What kind of relationship did you have? Would you consider her your friend?
A friend, not even an acquaintance. Because I had a connection with her because I'm also vegetarian, turning into vegan went very hard. And she was exceptionally beautiful. So you don't need to be an artist to recognize beauty. And all the girls too, like in the kitchen when they're eating, and then Emma comes to make her rice and her food, and we just look at her like, what are you doing in here? You come from a fairy tale, because she has that like whimsical something about her that's very like, I mean, in the scenario, especially of the shelter, because the woman there, 80% look very ugly, like non-care. They just gave up, whatever. She had the thing that was like, here I am, well, I'm there up here, but you're humans too. Something like that. She wouldn't say it, but you could see her goodness in her. People calling her hippie and all this, like, no, Emma was not a hippie. Like, she looked like a lady that could be married today.
Wow. There's so much to take away from that, Jordan. I was trying to make mental notes while I was listening to that. So there's a few interesting things. I mean, what stands out the most to me is the mention of a boyfriend. Because as far as I know, the research I did, the interviews I did, the reporting I did, I never came across anyone who said Emma was seriously seeing anyone in Victoria. I mean, she might have dated, maybe, who knows, maybe she was seriously seeing someone, but that's the first time I've ever heard anyone outright say, she said she was running from a boyfriend. I mean, I'd heard about, a relationship she had in Camel River when she was in chef school or cooking school up there, but nothing about Victoria. So right away, that was very, very interesting. What did you think of that?
That's what stood out is, as far as I knew, no one knew why she was staying in the shelter. And I assumed it was just I was going on the assumption or the belief that she was just had so much going on mentally that she just simply couldn't manage housing. And maybe that was why she was kind of half homeless, half living in the shelter. According to Patty, and she made this very clear, is that she had multiple conversations with Emma about Emma wanted to be off the streets and staying with the shelter because she was being stalked by, and Patty seemed vague about, I think she said boyfriend, but she said she wasn't sure.
She said it was a boyfriend or like something, but it was definitely a man. It was definitely very clear to her that it was a man, and that's why she was there.
Yeah, but I do recall, like, from the prior episodes and stuff I do remember people saying, like, I believe it was Micah, her roommate for a period of time, had said that she did have troubled relationships with men, and it just never really worked out. So maybe it could have been talking, like you said, about someone she had dated. Maybe it was just something that came out of Emma. But according to Patty, and you'll hear her talk about this more, is that was really something that had her worried and afraid. But yeah, that stood out to me. What doesn't surprise me is that she stood out in the shelter as being like really intelligent and together and beautiful and looking like she walked out of a fairy tale.
What did Patty say? Like whimsical. Whimsical was such a great word choice. Like, yeah, like you said, out of a fairy tale. And I think the first time I ever saw pictures of Emma, because like her mother and family have posted pictures of her on pages and stuff, a lot of them are very whimsical-esque. I think there's one where she's like she's in a field and she's, you know, I can't remember what she's doing. She's playing with a kid or something like that, and it's looked like that's like, yeah, that's out of a catalog or something, or out of a movie. Like it's very whimsical and photogenic, and I think everyone can agree that Emma is a very, very attractive young lady who also has other qualities that are just very alluring, and I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to this case. But I want to say, though, I think that description that Patty gave is just incredible. Like, I think it goes to show you that no matter who Emma met, she left a very strong and positive impression on them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, yeah, I'm just stuck on the idea of she went there to try to escape someone.
Well,
and it just brings up, like, of course, I think a lot of people who are going to hear this are immediately going to think of Julian.
Well, and I'm glad you said it, because I was going to bring that up. But sorry, let me let you finish, and then I'll because I was thinking about that.
Well, that's all I got to say about it is that when people think of Emma being stalked, immediately that's where their mind is going to go.
Yeah.
But Patty didn't, at least at this part of the interview, didn't use his name. So that made me think, like, is she talking about Julian? And maybe she didn't know his name, but you'll hear later on she does talk about Julian and uses his name. So she knows him enough that I feel like if Emma said to her, this guy Julian is doing this, Patty would have said it there just because she knows who he is, and why would she at this point not use his name? And later in the interview she does. And I also want to just preface, like, I'm filling in a bit of the blanks with what Patty said, and a part of that is because of the editing, but also a part of it is because some stuff was really hard to get a straight answer or clarification. You'll see as we go here. One of the things that I was trying to talk to Patty about, it took me like 2 or 3 attempts of getting her to answer the question before she actually gave like a clear, definitive answer. And I don't know if that's the translation or just her manner of speaking, but anyway, I just wanted to make it clear that during this part of the talk, she didn't reference Julian, although I'm sure a lot of people who are listening are thinking she's talking about Julian. I'll get to the next part of the talk with Patty. What came next is we had just heard her describe meeting Emma, and Emma standing out as this whimsical, intelligent, beautiful person in the shelter that seemed out of place. I next asked her more about what did you know about Emma, and what did you know about Emma's life outside of the shelter, just to see like how close were they really, because that was one thing I was trying to figure out, like, were you besties, were you acquaintances? So here's how she answered the question of what did you know about Emma's life.
Okay.
Like, as far as the way Emma was, what was your impression about her lifestyle? Like, you had told me you don't believe she was living a life of homelessness. Did you have any sense of what her life was like outside of the interactions you'd have with her in the shelter?
She absolutely looked like someone who was running away. She more or less you could tell by the characteristics, but she was very like afraid. She's not the girl that you would see in a shelter at all.
Okay. And you had explained to me you felt like this was a vulnerable time in Emma's life. When you say that, is there any particular thing about her that you felt made her vulnerable? Like some people would say that believe Emma was mentally ill would say she was vulnerable because of illness. But I know you don't believe.
I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I hope you find a psychiatrist to give you more or less an idea of what the picture was.
Yeah. Did you feel like she was someone that maybe was not safe for some reason?
I'm not saying Emma had mental illness, because what she was put through, let's see who would end up with fear.
Yeah. So
it's like you're going to see a movie, a horror movie, and then the woman is whatever, looks crazy, right? And now everyone's saying that the woman is crazy. That woman in Canada, no, I don't know, in Victoria, everybody says that people have mental illness like is normal. In Spain, only a doctor says that. Like people don't say that about anyone.
Yeah.
We're naturally crazy also, so we allowed our part of ourselves to be to talk nonsense in our arts. So we have sympathy about letting ourselves be loose. In Canada, it's like everyone has to be really nice, and then you have, if somebody is looking at the stars or pushing the lifts in the fall because they love nature. Like, I really want to be here just to say how much I hate Canadians for that.
Yeah.
And now Americans in YouTube.
I understand.
Calling this beautiful, innocent girl, like, oh, this is mentally ill. Yeah, because, like, what is that? It's so disgusting.
Yeah, and that's something you made really clear to me from the beginning, is you don't believe that Emma was suffering from any kind of mental illness. But you also mentioned
I think she had her reasons to be suffering, or, you know, like.
Wow.
In that, I think the big kind of reveal in that was, I had told you a bit of the background on Patty not liking that I talked to, and that the episodes that I did portrayed Emma as being mentally ill. Patty firmly denounces the mental illness hypothesis, I guess. And as you just heard in that clip, I made reference. I'm like, you've explained before that you don't feel Emma was mentally ill. I'm referencing the messages I was sending back and forth to Patty.
Right.
I knew that was something that she felt. And I think a part of that is Patty's a real kind of artistic, out there person. So I think she sees Emma in a different way, being like, this is the way people are. And in her mind, it's like, in Canada, everyone is so nice and organized. But in my life, being Patty's life, she, I guess, is just used to people like Emma. And she just doesn't seem to think Emma had a mental illness.
Yeah, to me it sounds like maybe a little bit cultural too. Like, I'm sure there are different perceptions of mental illness in mainstream society in places like Spain or wherever Patty is from. I'm assuming it's Spain. And you know, I think that's part of it too. Like, maybe the way she was raised and grew up with, and the way, like, you know, she said only doctors comment on that. Like, it's a very, you know, whereas, you know, the society we live in, people openly talk about their experiences. People openly, you know, speculate on people's mental health. So I think maybe that's part of it as well. But I think you're also right too. I think she has a very similar cerebral kind of attitude that Emma would have, like, very open-minded, very artistic in some ways. And so maybe, you know, maybe it doesn't want to pigeonhole her thoughts on that to Emma. But I also want to say, from my own experience, mental illness is very hard to pick up in some people. Some people are very good at hiding it. Some people are very good, are ashamed of it, push it down. So I think it's hard for any of us to really say what Emma's mental state was. Although I think it's fair to say it wasn't well at the time she went missing. And I believe Patty says that eventually, that something was off. She'd changed a little bit. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very fascinating.
Yeah, but I think, like, of course I've never met Emma, and so everything that I'm going by is based on the different people that I know, that I've had a chance to talk to, that met her or been you know, involved in her life in some way. Patty's version of Emma, to me, strikes me as in contrast to a lot of the others, where she seems to describe Emma more so as, like, in a lot of ways she talks to her as being, like, kind of calm and collected, but at the same time, like, scared and worried and facing this threat. Although Patty has never been able, in my talks with her, been able to really elaborate on that much more than she seemed like she was hiding. She talked about being stalked. So yeah, I'm and that's what Patty is equating what a lot of others have said was a mental illness and paranoia. Patty is more like, no, she was scared and she was running from something. So it's that's kind of where that I, like, diagnosis gets a bit blurry, where the different people have the different opinions. But
and that's been a conversation throughout the Emma case, is what was her mindset like, the days and weeks leading up to her disappearance. And I think we've even talked about it. Like, I think we've all both admitted that we think some sort of mental illness or some psychotic episode was happening, but we're not psychiatrists, we're not psychologists, we don't know, we've never met Emma. So I do like that Patty is kind of a bit more reserved on that theory. She is a bit more no, she was having a hard time with whatever she was going through. It doesn't necessarily mean something was really wrong with her. So that's really interesting, Jordan. Very interesting.
Well, what we in the past hadn't known about kind of the time immediately leading up to Emma's disappearance, we're going to get into it now. And as someone myself who's really poured over a lot of info related to Emma's case, the remainder of my talk with Patty is like I was on the edge of my seat as this was happening, because what Patty is going to walk us through is a couple her hour to maybe 2 hours of time with Emma, just like I think 4 hours before she was last seen. So if you read the timeline of Emma's disappearance, we know about, and I've talked about this a ton on the podcast, what she was doing the day of her disappearance, getting the prepaid phone and the prepaid credit card and going to the library and the different sightings where she was seen. Eventually, I think it's at 6 p.m. on the day of her disappearance. She was last seen closer to I think around 10:30. But around 6 p.m. she went back to the women's shelter for the final time. And when she went in the women's shelter, it was Patty she encountered in there. And Patty was with her the entire time until their experience ends with Patty chasing her into the street, yelling at her and everything else. You're going to hear all about it, but the first thing that I got into in talking about Patty's experience with Emma on Emma's last known day is I just wanted to clear one thing up, and I thought Patty'd have the answer to this, and that is Shelley was coming, and there's I guess it's been an accepted thing that Emma knew somehow that Shelley was coming, although Shelley hadn't told her. So the belief, I suppose, is that someone who worked at the shelter maybe told Emma, your mom is coming. So I just wanted to find out from Patty, did Emma know Shelley was coming before she disappeared? And if so, what did she say, or how did she react to it? So this is one of the examples of something I had to ask her twice to get the full story.
Okay.
So here's the first response to that question. Now, there's a part of Emma's story that you were involved in and you were there for that I really want to hear you talk about, and that is that in the days just prior to Emma's disappearance, it seemed like she was considering going home to her mom in Ontario, and then there was the plan for her mom to come and get her. There's some debate about whether Emma knew that her mother was coming, and if she did know, how she found out.
Emma knew she was coming.
Emma knew, okay.
I was worried for Emma because I could see her state was, I don't know, like Jesus. Let's say when Jesus says, I'm not of this, my kingdom is not of this world. Something like that. Emma was somewhere else. Emma was in another world, okay? She was taking the sunshine. I do meditation, okay? Mm-hmm. I've been in India. I've done meditation for 40 years. I could be then 4 hours in silence. And I know she was not in this world. I'm coming with my files, like if I'm trying to get my kids, and she's taking the sun. I'm not going to say that's mental illness to be in another world. She's enjoying the sun. She was with no drug addicts, never hanging out with anyone. That was natural. Maybe created by the mind or lack of, I don't know. She slept always in the shelter world. Okay. Mm-hmm. What takes to the man to flip is all those triggers. Putting her in the streets. She is being followed by someone. You know what happens if I'm screaming and threatened to you, that stays here. Mm-hmm. That stays here again and again. So a way to sometimes avoid crisis is just to disconnect, man. Just go, try to be positive. Well, look at the sunshine. I didn't know anything. I just really thought this is the tree in front of the courthouse, and you cross the street, and there is Sandi Merriman, and there is Emma sitting in the sunshine, like a little Buddha, The volunteers call her the Golden Girl. She was, you could see her face totally delighted. We would share words because, I would perceive her, you just don't approach someone like that, right? You don't know if the person maybe, is reading a book or wants to be in conversation or stop the book, or she wants to stop the sunshine. She was not reading it, but what I mean is that, so there is a little bit of movement, and then, if there is a gesture, I say hello. So that was always like that. When you're walking and you feel someone behind?
Yeah.
Some people do, some don't. Emma would.
Okay.
All right? Emma would. So we have an instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I told Emma to look for the library, to reach her family. I miss my family so much. You try, to redirect. I miss my family so much. I mean, they're so annoying, because I could tell, she has to, we're so different, my family, things like that, because I know your pride when you are doing your life,
mm-hmm.
You're young. And it's so you can imagine, right? I had something dark,
mm-hmm.
Right? I don't have any evidence. This is nothing she told me. I only told Shelley this and some volunteer, because this is talking crazy, crazy shit.
Mm-hmm, that's okay.
All right. She had something that I cannot talk about this because she I could see it. I cannot talk because it's not reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
But when she was sitting there, I saw her this is in slow motion. All this information can happen in 3 seconds, all right? Mm-hmm. But as I approach, but I'm telling you this is dark, okay? It's hard to kind of say this, but okay. So I felt like her body or soul was just not really in this realm, right? Like this, she was disattached, and she never has ever said anything crazy. Okay, what I'm telling you is my own impression.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you that I have seen it not like a person, but I have saw it like a force. And then she recognized she's blind, but she can run away from it. Like she's just is always there. And this is creepy. Okay, she looked at me. Now she looked at me then I surrender and I'm gonna be famous. Okay, this is creepy, mm-hmm. But this Shelley has her. I mean, she says, yeah, Emma has that side of her. But I'm not saying it's mental illness. Okay, I'm really telling you that's something.
Mm-hmm.
And she could. It was like she couldn't escape from it.
Wow. Well,
yeah, I'm laughing because there's a lot to get in there.
Yeah.
Wow.
But you see that's kind of that was what was hard with Patty is I would ask, that was the answer to the question, did she know her mom was coming? What she didn't, she said yes she did, but then she went on to really explain in kind of creepy detail
cryptic
of Emma's
too, very cryptic.
Yeah, but it was what it got to was like Emma's behavior in the days leading up to her disappearance. She described Emma as being like, she said it in kind of a poetic, creative, cryptic kind of way, but it sounded like she was describing kind of a dark, like kind of like ghost-like person. But what I didn't understand, and I listened to the interview with her a few times to try to understand, is she said something like Emma had this thing where it was like, I'm gonna be famous. Did you? Like,
yeah,
I don't know
that
what
didn't make
meant.
any sense to me either. I think I interpreted that as it was a cultural or language kind of trip up, where it was probably, those weren't exactly the right words is what she was trying to say, because it doesn't make sense to me, like everything I've ever heard. And I mean, I sat down with Mika for hours in a house, talking to her about Emma, like one of her best friends, and there was no indication that she had any desire to be a public figure or that well known. Like, she liked her privacy, reveled in being a little secretive, and kind of like, I can identify with that, like being alone and being private. So that didn't really make sense. Yeah, I mean, you obviously had the whole chat with her, so there's probably a bit more context for you. I did find it disturbing that she very obviously saw a very drastic change in Emma. Mm-hmm. Did you get any sense of, like, was there a catalyst for that? Like, what, was it just one day she came back to the shelter and Patty noticed it? Like, I'm wondering, can you fill in the blanks there a little bit?
Yeah, I wish, because I couldn't get a clear description of that, because it would always go to, I don't believe she was mentally ill. Because I think a lot of people who see this story would describe it as like Emma was kind of falling apart and something was affecting her. But Patty, like, she never used that kind of language of like Emma was like having a breakdown or something. It was always Emma was kind of succumbing to this, darkness is kind of the way Patty would describe it. So it was hard to get a really clear picture. What I was trying to find out with this line of questioning is, A, did Emma know Shelley was coming? B, how did she react to that? And C, how did she find out? Like, who told her?
Well, let's run through the answers to that, though. So A is yes. It sounds like Emma did know her mother was coming, correct? Did I interpret that right?
That's what she said.
Okay.
But she didn't answer B and C. What I did was, after that, I very directly asked her the question again.
What question was that? Just like, did Emma know?
Was like, did Emma know, and how did it seem to affect her? And I got a better answer when I drove it the second time. Let me just answer that, because let me go to that clip
that answers it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, man. Wow.
In the day of her disappearance, like that morning or the night before, she was aware her mother was coming, as you mentioned. Did she seem like she was panicked or upset about her mom coming? Or did she communicate anything about that?
She was both. She loved the idea of her mother coming. You could see she had a good childhood and connection with her mother. Mm-hmm. And then she skipped her eyes away. But she never talked about anyone. Mm-hmm. But you could only catch by her facial expression. By then the change, by then her change, it was drastic. Like the Emma standing straight, she would be more like this. Yeah. Her mm-hmm. physical position like this. And she would have forgotten some things. Like, she forgot that I lived in the shelter, because I told her I could help you and take you with me. And she kind of hung to my arm. I don't know if I took her but I remember. But her physical position changed. She was looking for help, and she was not the Emma. She started to walk with plastic bags. Up and down from the street of the shelter. They were worried about her. Mm-hmm. So she didn't remember, in her mind state then, she didn't remember that I am also in the shelter, that I don't have nowhere to take her. So she told me, yeah, can I go with you? Like she thought I had a home.
So I don't
Whoa.
know if you.
Whoa.
Yeah, I don't.
That's very abrupt.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know if you caught that, but what she started, she was Patty was answered the question, like she didn't seem too upset about Shelley coming, but then she went into describing Emma's behavior like right before the disappearance, where she was kind of like didn't really know who Patty was or that Patty lived there. We're gonna get more into that, but just in that answer there, she went from answering the question to really describing like the worst Emma got, I guess is the way I would put it. But it took a bit, but the reason I dwelled on that question so much, and the reason I'm spending so much time on it now, is I just really wanted to clear that up, because Patty is the only person I think in the world who would be able to tell us how Emma was going to react to knowing her mom was coming. And the reason I want to make a big deal about it and clear that point up is some people's belief is that Emma fled Victoria because she knew her mom was coming and didn't want her mom to come find her, so she took off. That's just a theory some people have.
Absolutely. Did you find it interesting? It felt to me like a bit like when Patty was describing that, like kind of it reminded me of like Jekyll and Hyde. Like she started with Emma was sweet self and good, and then there was this like benevolent energy. Like was it Patty or Emma that one point says, oh no, it was Patty said to Emma, like, I thought you had a home, like, or no, sorry, I think it's Emma that says it to Patty, I thought you had a home, and like she's almost looking for refuge, beyond the shelter. And I mean, to me it's way beyond anything I'm sure a psychologist, psychiatrist could break down this behavior way better, but to me it almost like Patty's voice felt afraid. Like she felt a little bit afraid of Emma when she was recounting that. Did you get that sense when you were talking? Because you were on the phone. Like, definitely. To me, that was very dramatic. And then the way that you kind of ended that clip, and I know it was edited, but even just the way it ended, like that was a very intense moment for Patty, going back and drawing on that. So,
and I think the reason that moment, or one of the reasons that moment's so intense, is because what she was really describing is like the night before, the day of Emma's disappearance.
Oh, absolutely. And the hindsight of it too, right?
And the whole idea of needing of wanting refuge, that's going to make more sense when we get into what happened in the shelter at 6 p.m. just hours before Emma disappeared. So let me set the stage here. So we if you've watched the documentaries about Emma, the documentary about Emma, Finding Emma, or listen to my episodes, we know about her behavior that day, where she was going, what she was doing. Again, she returns to the shelter at about 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And that's one of the last times she's seen. I never knew what happened in the shelter. I just assumed she went in there to maybe grab something from her bedroom or something. Mm-hmm. But that isn't at all what happened. I'll let Patty explain, but Emma basically went there at 6 p.m. looking for somewhere to stay and wasn't able to stay there. And I think that this is a really critical part in this story.
I was just going to... I was just going to say, before you play the clip, this is a very interesting walkthrough. Like, I feel like this is an insight we haven't had about Emma's disappearance yet. That is, it feels heavy. It feels very heavy.
I agree 100%.
Anyway, sorry, I didn't want to screw up your intro to that clip.
No.
I feel like it's worthy of mention that this is very heavy stuff.
All I would say about this next part is that if Emma was falling apart and grasping at whatever she could to stay afloat, this next part I think is the moment that she goes over the edge. I'll let Patty explain when Emma arrives to the shelter at 6 p.m. hours before she disappeared.
Okay, let's hear it.
You have 1 week emergency bed every 3 months, regardless if you're coming in or out every month. I think you have to be out for 1 month. I don't know. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. But I know every month your bed is taken out. You have to go out. Mm-hmm. The other shelter is full of men, drug addicts, and it's horrendous because they look like zombies, and nobody cares. Was one person telling me, yeah, we're calling the mother, but this is out of the book because they shouldn't reach. I explained them, look, you have to get, I cannot explain this well. I need to take some medication to relax my anxiety for this interview.
It's okay.
When I ask them for the bed, they say they're gonna give her the bed, and I push forward. I said she only needs food, space to relax and recover. Like this, she could not return. People like this could not. The mind could get stuck there, not return. She was not talking crazy things. She was not. She was. I know something in her mind because she didn't remember that I don't have a house to bring her.
I understand.
So, and her body, and I mean, okay, they're calling her mother, but they're not giving her a bed. Like, what kind of protocol is that, right? So, okay, I come again with Emma. We are sitting the stairs that go up. The attic is the third floor. But we're sitting on the stairs that is in front of the office that is in the entrance because they said we have to wait. That I don't remember her name. She was chubby in her 30s. She was really like, maybe she was the one trying. And they had like something going on. But they make us wait in the stairs, sitting there. And Emma was starting to retract more and more.
When you and her are waiting on the stairs, how did it end? I understand
that was a scenario, and another one coming in, maybe like a white trash, and maybe she had so many men and drugs that there's just another ordinary day there to go there and complain to the office, and then a third. We're sitting there in the stairs waiting for what? An emergency bed that they're gonna kick her out in 1 week, anyways. The fear was great. You could feel the fear in Emma. And I was really like, how I'm going to do? Because I was also starting to feel afraid, because I don't want to lose her. But at that moment, I could feel her fear because she was already like retracting, all right? Emma didn't grow up in an aggressive environment to deal through that. Okay? Which most of the girls in St. Merriman were prepared to just be there, and you come from another environment as well. How safe do you feel?
I should have set that up a bit better, but it's what I can explain is that I thought I was included in the clip, so I didn't explain it, but the way this shelter works, that you don't just live there. You're only able to stay there a certain amount of times
it's not
a month.
indefinite.
Yeah. So what must have happened is Emma must have used up her like the amount of time she could stay there. She showed up at 6 and wasn't able to take a room. And Patty advocated for her by going to like the office to be like, we got to give her an emergency bed. We got to do something. And based on listening to that clip several times, it seems like what had happened was Patty was advocating for Emma to the staff, and it seems like the staff said to Patty, we're going to call her parents. It's protocol. She can't stay here. And Patty was explaining that there's some kind of situation where there's like an emergency bed that she thinks Emma should have been able to get. Meanwhile, as this is all happening, Emma and Patty are sitting on a staircase, watching just random people coming and going as Emma's in the midst of what to me appears to be a nervous breakdown or something.
Something of that sort.
And that's why I think Patty said like Emma wasn't raised in like an aggressive environment. So Emma, like I'm picturing this like princess that's like falling apart, sitting on the staircase basically in a homeless shelter, which is just not where what she needs is like a quiet bed to like have a glass of water and lay down and like cry it out with her family is kind of what ideally would be happening at this part in the story.
Can I ask you one question about that clip? So again, my terrible memory, I'm trying to recall this, but I'm fairly certain the shelter itself never called Shelley. It was Emma calling from this shelter that put the caller ID on Shelley's phone that made her call her daughter back and go, and then the shelter say, oh, this is a woman's shelter, and that's when Shelley got freaked out. I think I'm recalling that correctly, am I not?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. And Shelley initially thought Sandi Merriman was like a friend Emma was staying with.
Yeah, it sounds like a person. It doesn't necessarily sound like a shelter, especially on those short caller ID, labels.
Yeah. And then when Shelley called back after one of the times Emma was like caller frantic, that was when they answered like Sandi Merriman Women's Shelter. But but eventually in those calls, Shelley must have told the staff, although Shelley says she doesn't remember saying this, Shelley must have told the staff like, I'm coming.
Yeah.
And one of the staff members must have told Emma. That's the only thing that makes sense.
That's what I was trying to get at, was how would she have known, unless when Emma, because she did talk to her mother, I think earlier that evening or that day, or maybe it was the day before, but I think I think Shelley was on the verge of coming out there anyway. You know what I think that clip you just played, that to me, as a storyteller, someone who tries to put a narrative together about whether it be missing persons or a mystery, that was the absolute climax point of the story, where Emma is sitting on a stairwell with maybe her only friend in the shelter, or one of her only friends in the shelter. And I'm not sure if there's a follow-up clip to this, but I feel like she kind of just made a run for it because she didn't know what else to do. Like, it was like she's not, and I think maybe she didn't understand the situation either, because I don't know the protocol for shelters super well, but I do assume that you can get another bed, but there has to be a turnover process where other people are allowed to stay there. So it's like one of those things where it's like you can only have a bed for a certain amount of days. Then there's a turnover, and then if there's one available, you can have another one again. I don't think you're completely barred from that facility, for a certain amount of days. They need to accommodate new people in difficult situations. Pardon me. So it to me, it's just to finish the thought before I lose it. To me, it's a very intense moment, and I think you can hear it in Patty's voice. To me, even Patty's, because you know how Patty at times she will. It's like, when you recall really traumatic like childhood tales or like things that happened to you that really imprinted in your brain and your life, you kind of always, the narrative gets a bit more skewed or dramatic depending on what it is. And I think Patty is absolutely telling the truth and is relaying what she saw. But I think in her mind, some of it is so burned into it that I just wish she would follow up sometimes on that. I'm like, what happened next? But because she was so in the moment and reacting on emotion and adrenaline, it's hard to it's hard to really see her perspective sometimes, because I almost feel like it's a big dream. Like it's almost like a nightmare. You're like, oh, this is the worst case scenario when someone's like, she's having a breakdown. She's trying to get a place. Her friend's advocating for her, and then I think, a clip you're going to play is just she flies out the door, and what happens then, right?
Yeah, because it's as they're sitting on the stairs and this is all happening. The way Patty describes it is there's two main shelters, homeless shelters. One is the Sandi Merriman, which is a women's shelter. The attic is a safe place for Emma that she's presumably comfortable. The other shelter, I think, is your more traditional homeless shelter. Yeah. It's men and women, drug problems. Absolutely. The Wild West. So it seems like what can happen is when your time is up in the Sandi Merriman, if you got whatever it is, 2 weeks, a month there or whatever, when your time's up, your choice then is, should I go to the other shelter and rough it out, or like sleep in the woods kind of thing? So I'm thinking Emma at this point's probably faced with the choice of going somewhere that she's very uncomfortable in, while in the middle of a breakdown, or God knows what, but whatever it is, the walls are closing in on her. Nothing's really happening between Patty and the staff at Sandi Merriman as far as getting Emma in a quiet, dark place to relax. And this is where that famous scene plays out, where Emma now, like you said, she takes a run for it out of the shelter with Patty chasing after her. And again, this is like 3 hours before she is talking to the police in last scene. Here's how Patty described Emma running out of there.
Okay, let's hear it.
So tell me about Emma running out of the shelter. I've always known this story of her running out and you chasing after her, but I've never heard it in any detail. Can you tell me about when she gave up waiting for an emergency bed and fled?
So she runs out. I run after because I was sharing the fear of Emma. I don't know why, but nobody was watching. No one cared. So she runs out. I run after. There's this gap of grass. Victoria has this beautiful grass that goes along with the walking street. I mean, in Europe, that's a luxury. So I just stopped because I am really so I stopped, and here's Sandi Merriman. There is the walk, all this grass. The courthouse is here, and she's running straight towards the hotel, where I didn't know she had her van or car. I didn't know she had one. Well, I was running after her, but what I'm going to do? I wanted to take her, I wanted to take her and just bring her back. But, I'm a Spanish person. I'm like an immigrant. I don't want problems with the police. And even it's illegal to take someone like that against their will. Mm-hmm. So she will return tomorrow, I guess, Mm-hmm. But it was the fall. So for me, it was a moment, also this moment that the time goes very slow, and it creeped me again because it was like a movie. I told you that was like, she had light coloring clothes. I don't know, gray, but with her blonde hair, she didn't have a braid, with all the shoes. So it looked like, it was dark, the darkness of the night. She didn't look to the sides to cross the street, running without shoes. So she looked like a soul. Mm-hmm. I mean, she looked like a ghost or someone that's not of this world. I really remember, God, this is creepy, she's beautiful. I know you will return, and she was like, no. Hey, that was an impression, an impression. She didn't say no. I didn't hear no, but I did think, you will return, Mm-hmm. But what's the thing? I think in her mind, the social workers not taking care of me when I need it. I still today feel her fear in that moment.
Wow. What strikes me a lot about the way Patty talks? It's almost literary, and maybe that's me coming from a writing background, but her imagery and her metaphors about Emma are very powerful. I almost get lost in them, then I kind of lose where she's going, because she does jump around quite a bit. You can tell she has a very excited personality, and she wants to get out what she's thinking. Because I think it makes more sense for me to ask you, what did you take away from that, having talked to her for 2 hours? That's to me is a very symbiotic and almost movie-esque kind of situation. It was it was heartbreaking for me to hear Patty talk about her like that. She just wanted her friend to come back, really.
Yeah, and wanted to do something to help, but really, what can you do? It's just like Patty said, it's you can't put her in a headlock and drag her somewhere.
I like how she recognized that, though. She was like, "Yeah, that's illegal," and I was like, "That's good. That's totally." Because she probably wanted to.
Yeah, she wanted, but she tried to get her something, and I'm sure if we could see a video of Patty going to the desk at the shelter saying you got to get Emma a bed, I'm sure there was a big incident involving that. But really, what Patty describes, the way I picture it, is Emma takes off out of there. Patty runs after her, probably yelling her name, and says and then just is what can I do? And she lets Emma run off towards the hotel, where her van was. And Patty mentioned that, and that led me to think,
Followed her for quite a bit.
Well, just for it wasn't too great of a distance, but Emma, like, could she not have stayed in her van? I'm wondering if she ran over there to maybe just like go in her van and like shut the door, like that. Maybe that's one of the reasons, like something that would have brought her over that way. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
And but... I think one of your listeners or viewers right now pointed out in the chat, like she did have quite a bit of money in her bank account. I mean, it wasn't a crazy amount, but it was enough for a hotel room for a night. So if she really needed, you know, a $200, $300, $400 room a night in Victoria, which is like the rate it is here, having lived here, you know, for 8 years now, it's expensive.
Oh, yeah, you're in Victoria.
Yeah, I've been here for 7 years. 7 years.
I completely forgot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we just did New Year's in a hotel room, and it cost us quite a bit, but it was, but to go back to the point about Emma, it's you know, not unfathomable to think that she couldn't have afforded $200, $300, $400 hotel room, because I think when her bank account was last checked, Shelley's made this public. I want to say it was at least over $1,000. Like it wasn't a petty amount. Like it was something where it's like, yeah, if you were in a crisis, that's going to get you at least to the next day.
But that's one thing for us to say, thinking logically. But
absolutely.
If you're gonna follow that thread,
100%.
You could be like, well, why not? Didn't she just get medicine for the mental illness? If that's
well, yeah, no, of course. And I think the point I was trying to make was more that if she was of more sound mind and she knew, like, you know, having someone who's dealt with depression and anxiety, like when I've had a bad day or a bad time, especially when I'm away from people I care about, it's like I just need alone time and a really safe place. That's all I need. And to me, a hotel room would be that. So to me, I think that the fact that Emma took to the streets, and then of course we know the interaction she had with Dennis Quaid, to me it speaks to something greater going on. And I think Patty did a good job of describing someone who's probably having a very traumatic personal episode, mental health episode of some sort, right?
To me, it just sounds like I would describe this, from what I hear, I describe it as like a nervous breakdown, or
a psychotic break. I think maybe the delusional aspects of the, like, again, and this is a theory, I'm going to stamp this saying a theory, whoever's watching this, like listening to it, my theory and thoughts have always been that I don't. Do you want to go there yet, or do you want to wait till the end of the clips? I don't want to necessarily go too
jump into it, because where we're at in the story now is Emma's basically gone missing now.
Okay,
this is the last time Patty saw her was what we just described.
And I want to say I have stayed in touch with Julian since I did this story several years ago. We communicate over Facebook very sporadically. It's always very cordial. It's always very like he has a lot of guilt about a lot of things, but I don't ever get a sense that, like, I get the sense that it was a coincidence that he moved to Victoria at the same time, almost the same time Emma did. I think it was like a year later or something like that. But I always got the impression from my research and the people I talked to, like, especially her close friends, that Emma was having a hard time. And she was, her family, I know her family history has some mental illness in it. You know, that's been confirmed to me personally by Shelley and other people. And you know, my family has it too. It's very common in a lot of places. So for me, it's like, I think that climax of her being on that stairwell and then this whole scene playing out with Patty is this really tragic, you know, sequence where Emma's been running for something for a while. I don't think she even knows what it is. But she's running from it, and it ends up, culminating in, you know, her barefoot in front of the Empress Hotel, having this conversation with police. And then basically, to me, the biggest faux pas is that they didn't take an extra step to make sure she had a place to stay for the night, especially not being from there. I don't, like, thing to me is like, did she even have a registered address at the point? Like, you're staying at a shelter, you don't have a registered address. So like, if you show an ID and they check it in the system, like, does that even register, or was that a flag for them? Like, I have a lot of questions about, and again, I'm not I'm not anti-police. I have a lot of respect for all law enforcement people, but I feel like that situation, it could have been a very different outcome if it was handled differently.
That's the way I see it too. Yeah, I feel the exact same way. I feel like, going based on just what I heard and the way Patty described it to me, the shelter was kind of the first the first kind of gatekeeper, and they presumably had some option, or there was something they should have been able to do if it was as apparent to them as it was to Patty that stuff was going wrong with Emma. So I don't know if that involves, or Patty mentioned, it seems like the shelter was going to call Shelley right then and there to be like, this is going on right now. They didn't know this, or maybe they did, but Shelley, I think, would have been on a plane going to Victoria as this incident happened. Emma flees in whatever state she's in. I don't know. I still don't understand how that didn't ring wrong to the police officers who encountered her, because it seems like she was out of her mind.
Well, even the way Patty says what she was saying, like she was starting to get worried about her and her thought pattern. I know the one thing about shelters, my girlfriend Molly, she's a youth social worker in Victoria, and like, even when she's in private talking to me about her job, there's a lot of confidentiality, and there's a lot of things that people can't even say to family members of someone in a case. Like it's not so simple as like they could call her mom. Like they don't know if like that's what she's running from. Like it's very difficult. So I think like women's shelters, and this is again my probably a slightly ignorant perception of it, is that it's a place for women to find shelter, but it's not necessarily a fix-all. Like the staff there they don't have necessarily full-time psychologists or psychiatrists. It's like, it's literally a refuge, right? So yeah, they have to make a judgment call and keep it confidential. Like if someone wants to go to a shelter on their own accord because they're not forced there, they're not going to be driven into saying why they're there. Like that's their own business. All they know is that they need a bed for the night or the weeks or the months, whatever it is. So I think that's, to me, is why it's great that you got Patty to talk about this. I think it's very insightful. But I think the shelter aspect is something that is alarming, but also speaks to me solely when I look back at it, like you were just saying, to Emma's mental health. For a woman like that with some means to end up there, something was going very wrong. Do you ever get the sense, like, is there any bit of you that ever goes, this was nefarious? Something bad happened to Emma by someone else? Honestly, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Oh, you just answered it.
But I honestly, I don't. Like, no. Yeah. Initially, when I first learned the story, which was primarily from CBC's Finding Emma, I was like, Julian did it. No question. Well, that was how I felt initially. And in that, a lot of that, as I learned, and now if I watch the Finding Emma documentary, I understand the way the filmmaking put a villain in the story. Now that the more that I learn about it, I continue to just feel that, and I see Emma in other stories too. There's other cases that I follow that have had a resolution where I'm like, that's Emma.
What was the name of the woman we did about missing in Hamilton? That came really tragic.
Holly Ellsworth Clark,
and that was very similar. Yeah, we did an episode about that.
Yeah, and I even think Elisa Lam. I'm sure like a lot of people know that story. That's another Netflix one where there's the Netflix doc now, and as I watch it, I'm like, this is the kind of thing that seems plausible, or seems most likely to me in Emma's story. I think one of the big reasons for it is whatever was going on with Emma. As you just said, this is like the climax of the story. What are the chances that if someone was going to do Emma harm, that would happen to fall on the moment that she was in the climax of this breakdown? It just seems like it would be such a bizarre coincidence. Yeah. In an unlikely coincidence. But I firmly believe that that whatever happened to Emma was something that happened when she was alone somewhere on her own, running from whatever it is that she ran out of the shelter from, and whatever was eating away at her that led to these bizarre interactions.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna get to one thing, because I want to get back to the shelter, because in the next clip I'm going to play it in a moment. I ask Patty how she found out that Emma was missing, and this is a part that surprises me. You're going to hear her tell the story of how she learned Emma was missing, but Patty is going to tell us, she is going to describe how the shelter described Emma's behavior to the police. This was a big part of the motivation Patty had to talk to me, is she believes that the shelter's initial misrepresentation of Emma's mental state and attitude and behavior may have influenced the way the police handled this case. To give a bit more info, we've heard these stories of Emma hiding things and moving furniture around and doing all this strange stuff in the shelter.
Right.
Patty's opinion and Patty's statement to me several times is none of that ever happened, and that was things that were said to make Emma look nuts. I'll let Patty explain. How did you find out she was missing? Do you remember learning that she hadn't come back to the shelter?
Next day was the police there and the mother.
Mm-hmm.
It was the daytime. So I think I came to eat because I would go there to eat. There was the police and there was the oh no, yeah, because she was moving things. No, like really, really. And I'm like, really? Of course, her mother would be there. She would have taken her, she would have even maybe taken her to a new place if she didn't want to go home, or make her life, The police is there. I was a woman from a shelter and a Spanish person. So it doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter. The police never took my report. The mother at that time was kind of like shocked that her daughter was in a shelter. So I was another woman from a shelter. Mm-hmm. But the issue here is that the shelter lied about Emma moving things. Mm-hmm. They put her in the streets. They didn't give her a bed when she had the right to have an emergency bed immediately, because she was vulnerable. Why was she vulnerable? Because she's being stalked. She told me she that's why she was there. Mm-hmm. She left her job and everything because of that. The police believe the shelter because they work for the government. Mm-hmm. They believe the reports of the shelter. So they're looking at a woman that, that it changes the whole picture. This is a lie. The shelter did a big mistake here, and the police has to know. The police has to know the real situation of Emma Fillipoff. This was not Emma. Mm-hmm. I think she had the right to be afraid, and fear doesn't let you think well, I guess.
That's very interesting. I would say
I thought so too.
Yeah, a couple takeaways from me is one, I think her blame on the shelter is normal. I think that would be a normal reaction to have, but I don't think personally that's where the blame would lie with me, because you got to think of how many people are coming in and out of that place on weeks, days, months basis. There's probably not a lot of favoritism that happens, because it can't. The police thing is interesting. I think we agree that there was maybe some disconnect, although allegedly, the police talked to Emma for 40 minutes and deemed she was okay. That I find hard to believe. So that's what really is poking my cortex right now. So the police said they talked to Emma for it was 40 minutes, right? That's what the original public information says. But then here's this woman, Patty, who was in a shelter with her, the police have never met Emma. They don't know her at all. They show up on this person barefoot in the street, and they talk to her for 40 minutes to go, oh yeah, you're fine to be on your own. Whereas Patty, who has known this woman for a few days, seen her really good side, is seeing this more darker lost side, is immediately going this woman needs she needs to stay here. She needs to be with me. She needs to be safe. And so that's what gets kind of me going right now, Jordan, is I'm like, what do you make of that yourself, having talked to Patty for the full 2 hours? Was there any more insight to that?
I feel this, like, just like you, it just reinforces my belief that there's no way the police encountered and spent 40 minutes with the sane, rational Emma Fillipoff, who managed to gain control of herself and maybe turn it on just while she's talking to the police to get them off her back or something. Exactly. I don't see that. Yeah, I don't see that having happened. Maybe I would love to know more about the conversation they had with her and what kind of things they asked her, but I just can't imagine her pulling it off in any like effective way. And one other thing I guess to back up the shelter is, another thing that I was thinking is, I'm sure Patty doesn't know everything that was going on in that shelter with Emma, but she firmly believed that these things with like hiding things and moving the furniture and the clocks are talking to me that we heard Shelley describe, Patty said none of that had happened. So I just thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. The only thing to me that maybe Patty wasn't there, because I don't think you spend your whole day at the shelter. I think you do have to get out of there for a few hours a day. So maybe it happened at a different time. I would like to say, and I don't want to like take over your podcast by calling out your audience, but someone in your comments just said that they've had experience with bipolarity or bipolar, and that, remember when we were talking about that why would she want to say she's going to be famous expression, and someone who's manic might say something like that. And I think that's actually very interesting and semi-accurate in my experiences. I'm not bipolar, but I know people who are, and they do have grandiose thoughts of themselves sometimes that are very out of character. So again, not to put a label on it and say Emma is bipolar or anything, but I think it goes back. I think what we keep defaulting on, and Patty is inadvertently, because I know she doesn't really like this theory or believe in it, something was going on with Emma's mental health. And you know what to me is the most fascinating thing is that I think Patty felt like she knew this woman up until the night that she fled in that stairwell. And you could just tell she was like, she changed. Like she really, what's happened? And to me, that screams some sort of uncomfortableness that's far beyond, I'm in a bad situation. That's because if you're in a bad situation and you know someone pretty well, they're going to confide in you a little bit. They're going to, even if I'm in a bad situation, I've only met someone for 2 days, but I've spent, a lot of time with them, I'm going to let them know something's not good. But if I'm dealing with something much more complex than that, it would be easier to probably run away and think that there's another solution out there. What do you think about that?
I'm still like, I'm lost in the mystery, because I think so much of what she's saying is affecting I'm processing it in real time. Although I've had this conversation with her like 2 weeks ago or a week ago, I'm still like playing it out in my head. One thing though, I just want to touch on is, when she talked about the whole, like, I'm going to be famous sort of thing, I don't know if she was describing something Emma said to her. I think what she was doing was giving an impression of how Emma made her feel or appeared to her or something. I listened to that clip a few times, and I couldn't necessarily say it, decide or decipher exactly what she was saying, but it was really hard. And when you hear these clips that I have with Patty, you don't get the difficulty of the conversation, because not only was it hard to stay on topic, with where she was in Spain, there wasn't great internet. So
you interviewed her in Spain?
Yeah, I think she's in Spain.
I didn't. I thought she was still living in Canada. I didn't know she was. No,
she's long gone. But it was.
Wow.
There was a delay, so I was like, for me to get in and ask a question, it was hard because I was always interrupting her. So there would be a lot of points of things she brought up that I was like, man, I want to get clarification on that. And I'd ask, but she'd just keep talking, and and we'd be stomping all over. I'm sure you've had those kind of talks where you're at bad reception.
Oh, 100%. Or just like someone who is a talker, and I'm not really. Like, I love doing this with you, but I'd rather be asking the questions than answering them. That's just kind of my thing. Yeah. And I also want to say, like, for anything that I'm saying tonight, like, nothing is definitive. I just think and I'm sure we're going to have a breakdown in a minute overall of what we think about this, but I do think it's very interesting that, again, to me, this is revelatory in a way that it makes me still think that something was happening with Emma that we don't understand, some sort of mental health crisis. And it's just, you were managed to find someone who was there that night, other than Dennis Quaid. And, I mean, they reaffirmed it for me. I don't see it any other way. I just can't.
So before we get into what Patty thinks happened, because
Right.
that's the last clip we're going to hear, and
Okay.
it is a shocker, I think. But when I gave my opinion, I believe, like I have from very early on, that Emma met her end somewhere on her own terms, likely alone. What do you think had happened? Do you have, what's your theory?
I don't have a definitive theory after these few years of reading into it. I think it's probably safe to say that Emma did pass or has passed because of exposure or something like that. But the thing that keeps me worried at times is, there are sightings of her at 4, 5, 6 in the morning, in a pretty urban area. I mean, I've been there. My current partner lives very close to there. It's not that it is isolated, but it's not that isolated. So I think to me, the things that don't make sense is I don't think it was stalking. I don't think it was nefarious homicide. I don't think any of that. I think if it was any sort of foul play, it was very much spur of the moment, and it happened way later. It happened at 5, 6 in the morning. I think that she had a very complex family, like a lot of us do. And one of the reasons I stopped writing and reporting about it, this is my own right, was I couldn't break that code or seal with the family, where it was like there was obviously things going on with Emma before she left and while she left that again, me being an outsider would not expect people to share with me, but I always got the sense that there was a bit more to Emma in the story than Shelley and other people let on. And that's their prerogative. I mean, it's their children, their family. But so I guess this is a long-winded way of saying that I'm split between Emma was in a very bad situation with her mental health and she perished to the elements or by her own accord, or maybe she was trying to get away and maybe she did it successfully. I mean, that seems a lot less likely given her behavior, but that's kind of where I'm stuck in. And I think there's only really 3 options, right? So. Mm-hmm. I think we're on the same page.
Yeah. Patty, however, when I asked her the question of what do you think happened with Emma, you're going to have a lot to say after this.
Or hardly anything. Let's hear it.
It's not what I expected. Let me ask, as much as you know about Emma in her time just prior to her disappearance, have you ever come up with any opinion on where you think she is or what may have happened? Do you have any idea?
Of course I know. I don't only have an idea. I will only need the evidence to take me there.
So what is it?
Well, I wish the police and the investigation follow the clues. It's too easy to see that. It's very easy, even if you were not there. So,
Yeah, this has been amazing. You answered a lot of the questions that I had about that period of time in Emma's life. So
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's my obsession.
Well, there's no question that you were there at some pivotal moments, and you did the right thing by trying to get help for Emma.
Thank you anyways to Sandi Merriman who gave me shelter. Thank you to the people in Canada. Thank you to the volunteers who are still there. Thanks to you, really.
That's
and
okay.
for Julian I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You could be so much to the world in this plane.
I thank you for talking to me.
Bye.
Hold on. What?
Yeah,
Okay,
what her
so-
exact words were, and I'm sorry to Julian. I'm sorry you could be so much in this plane.
Wait, is that what she
said?
said? Have you listened to that several times?
Yeah, and it's when you, it may have seemed like when you listen there that I kind
I
of
just
like
heard
jumped
thank you
in
to
and
Julian.
wrapped
Like
up.
I didn't really hear the.
I'll play the final
Can you play?
part
Can you
again,
play
but-
that? Can you just play that again?
Yeah, and it sounds a bit like I'm jumping in, but what ended up happening was there was a big long silence that I clipped out of there.
Yeah.
And it was, to me, I felt like at this part of the conversation,
It was over.
it was over, but she was very clearly, like, cautiously choosing her words. So I can only, in my mind, absolutely she has something she wanted to say that didn't come out because it was
Okay, well, let's. Can you
Yeah.
footnote that? Because I want to come back to that earlier in the clips too.
yeah. Cool. So
This
let's
is fucking
listen to it.
wild.
I'm
Pardon
gonna-
my French. Jesus.
I'm gonna listen to that part one more time.
Yeah, I want to hear that again. Play it again.
You did the right thing by trying to get help for Emma.
Thank you, anyways, to Sandi Merriman who gave me shelter. Thank you to the people in Canada. Thank you to the volunteers who are still there. Thanks to you, really.
That's
And for Julian, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You could be so much
That's so bizarre.
to the world in this plane.
I thank you for talking to me.
Bye.
Okay, so did you ask her? Did you not follow up? Did you not ask her why? Thank you, Julian. Like you. Okay, so did you ask her about that at all after? Like why? How did you know Julian at least?
I did.
And then where did it go from there?
She knew who he was. She knew the story. And I asked her if she was why she mentioned him when she was giving her thanks, and she didn't answer that question.
Like, did she just totally skirt it, or did she just go on?
Talked about other unrelated things. And I asked several times, and at this point, our reception was getting as bad as it was.
Well, and you're like 2.5 hours in. You're like, okay.
And we were an hour and 40 minutes into what was supposed to be a 45-minute talk. But that was like a really important part. So I tried to get more out of her, but really, like, what you hear there is the best that I had. There was
So that's another rabbit hole. Is
well,
it not? What is that? Or is it just how else would she know Julian? From your podcast? But she says she loathes you. Says she listened to all your content?
I think she's listened to, or at least watched, several things about Emma, and because she had when we talked at one point, she lumped me in with like all the people on YouTube are talking about Emma being.
She didn't mention
mentally
my
ill.
name though, eh?
I'm sure it was.
She never made it to my
assumed.
article. Okay, I'm just checking.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is that she may know of him from several places. One, hearing him talked about on Finding Emma and in my podcast and other places. That's one. Other thing is, early on in the search, he was involved, and she would have been in the picture then. So she may have met him at that point.
Ooh, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Possibly. Third thing is, there's no secret that Julian was around after her disappearance on social media, talking with different people and connecting. He very well could have found out about her, and they may have talked.
Just
at
an
some
odd
point.
shout out, It's like she didn't shout out Shelley. She didn't shout out anyone else. It was not again.
Yeah.
I have a really good relationship with Julian. We catch up quite often. He's been through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I almost think it's after that. It's like worth having him back on, Jordan.
Well, I I don't know. I'd like
the
to
guy's
hear...
been through enough, or
Well, and it's like it wasn't an accusation either. It was just a weird thing she chose to say. Yeah. Because here's the thing, but what makes it more unusual is she kind of skirted the way she described, like, I know exactly what happened. If you follow the clues, the answer's there.
Yeah, to me that's so like everyone says that about their
yeah,
case
but then
that they follow.
But then to name someone so it's like
right.
Everyone knows what happened.
It seems disassociative, and then it kind of connects when you listen to it. Yeah, that is.
But then
odd.
she thanks the shelter, and when she says the volunteers, she means the people who volunteer at the shelter. She referred to them as the volunteers,
right?
And Julian, but she thanks Julian, but it's an apology. It's like, I'm sorry, Julian, that you're so much. And then she says, in this plane. I think she means like this plane of existence, because when we were getting late into the interview, she was getting a bit like out there at some of the things she was saying.
Plane of existence, plane of the interview.
It's I knew that was going to be that last clip was going to get you going, because it is weird, and I thought it was really weird.
Yeah, well, it's strange. Like, again, it almost, out of all the clips, not to say it was, but it's the most that feels scripted, where as soon as she diverts from the I have all the answers into, like, it's almost like she's like, unless you edited something in there, she's like, and then I want to thank the shelter, and it was just very, like, that's how she planned to wrap it up. Mm-hmm. It's also odd that she would thank the shelter when she kind of shit on them a little bit for the reaction to Emma going missing. Like, she was like, why aren't you doing more, like giving her a bed, like she's having, like, she was very critical of them. And I guess maybe that's me looking into it too much, because they did help her in her own bad times. So that's just very ominous. And I think all you've done is like really layered on the obscurity and rabbit hole of this case. But at the same time, I say this kind of a joke, because every time this happens that we get another interview, we go down this path. I guess for me then, does for you, because I didn't spend the whole 2.5 hours on the phone with Patty, did you get a different sense of what you already felt about Emma's case and disappearance? Like, was there, obviously there's some more context, but did you feel differently?
I don't know if I feel differently. It filled in a lot of the blanks. And a lot of the things that I already knew about the case, it allowed me to get a first-hand account of them. Like the whole story of her running out of the shelter, I knew about that, but I didn't know why she was in the shelter. I now know she was going there for a bed. So that's one thing that this cleared up. I know for sure now, definitively, that she knew her mom was coming from Patty. Mm-hmm. But the version of Emma that Patty described, I think, is a lot like the other versions of Emma we heard, but it's largely influenced by Patty's perception of the world. And Patty views Emma and other things a lot differently, I believe, than Connor did when he saw Emma, the month before her disappearance, or Micah did. So I don't think it really changes what I feel, but it fills in the blanks, and it gives me a more complete picture of that last day for sure.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
This is the first time I've talked to someone who saw her that close to her disappearance, of course. Julian claims to have seen her earlier in that day.
Yeah, earlier in that day, yeah.
And what he described sounds a lot like...
Didn't he say the handbags, like the plastic bags? Like, he remembered that. That's when she said that. I was like, oh, several people have highlighted that.
Julian just described her having plastic bags over her shoulder, or walking around some busy street. And Patty had mentioned that as well. But it would have been like Julian would have saw her earlier in the day. Mm-hmm. After that, she would have went back to the shelter, got turned away, ran out of there. From there, went over to Sandi Merriman, and it was, a couple hours later, she ran into Dennis Quaye, who called the police. So it's like, the whole, one of the things that I'm most excited about talking to Patty is it's just getting the firsthand account of these moments that exist within the story that has been talked about so much on, like, in those past episodes that I did. So it's just kind of taking this kind of black and white area of this narrative or of the timeline and coloring it in. You know,
well, to me, it's like another analogy is a puzzle piece. It's one more puzzle piece you've kind of put in there, because we hadn't, I think no one had really known what actually happened at the shelter. We got the shelter's version, which was very basically nothing, because they can't comment on these types of things. And then Shelley's recount of talking to people at the shelter. And I think she said one woman kind of secretly off the record gave her some kind of insight to Emma's behavior. But I would say you filled in a big puzzle piece about this case and what's going on. And I think, I mean, again, I do this every time I'm on your show, Jordan. And if Dennis Quay is listening, you know, I think he should come on your show, because I really think that's, I don't want to say the final puzzle piece, but a big puzzle piece before the police show up. And it might even be worth at this point pushing the Victoria police again. You know, it is considered a cold case or an unsolved case. And, you know, the thing about Emma's case is that it was so publicized for so long because of all the great work Shelley did doing interviews. And the last time I talked to Shelley, I felt like she was exhausted. Like you cannot fault her for it at all. It's like her daughter's been missing. Her family has changed. She's been doing all these interviews. And to me at this point, it's like, I don't know. I honestly think at this point, she probably remembers less details and more, given how long it's been and how traumatic it's been for her. That, you know, doing things like this, I think are really, really great, because I hope someone listens to this and goes, hey, I have something to add. Have you ever gotten wind of anyone else at the shelter? Like, are you know, in talks with anyone, or like, what's that been like? Or is this the only person you've really found?
There's two others that I've been in touch with, but it's right. People are, not everyone is comfortable talking about this sort of stuff. So it's, of course. There may be another one coming though. We'll see, but if it will be a little ways out, but if, hopefully it'll happen, but it's, I'll talk to anyone who has any connection to Emma, especially like if it's, you know, that final day, or in and around that day. Like, I would love to talk to more people in the shelter. Dennis Quay is someone from the very beginning I said I wanted to talk to, and that's...
Yeah, me too.
Like,
yeah.
I would love to make that happen. But at least with Patty coming forward, she adds her voice and her story to what's out there. So I'm happy about that.
Well, hey, and I think kudos to you, Jordan, for getting Patty on the show, and also kudos to Patty for coming forward, because she sounded like she was in a very vulnerable situation herself, and for her to come forward, talk that way about Emma and her own situation, and be that vocal about her opinion, I think is very valuable. And I hope she sees this in that light, because this is very important. And I think, you know, just give the comments people are leaving, they're very intrigued by this. So and hopefully there's a step forward here.
Yeah, Patty's big motivation, I said from the beginning, is she just wanted to clear up any misconceptions. She wanted to clear up the part of the story that she was involved in. A big thing that was really important to her was including the part that we heard where she described her belief and her opinion that from the very beginning when Emma went missing, it was painted as by the shelter. Patty believes it was painted to the police as she's, you know, that's this crazy girl who's gone nuts. Patty believes that affected how the police handled their investigation. But yeah, it's I thank Patty for talking to me, because this has definitely reignited my interest, as well as just it added so much more to how I see or what I know about that last day. Yeah, but I want to thank you for talking it out with me, because it's this case now. It's like whenever something happens, you're the first one I go to, because I feel like I hope it
stays that way, dude.
Although you're only on a couple episodes, it's like I do feel like we've co-hosted this whole thing, because you've been like, from the point that I met you, you've been like we've been right hand men on this.
Well, we've always shared, and we've always, like, I remember when you started doing your series, like, because it was after, I believe it was after I wrote the Vice article, I was like, that's what made the early days of me wanting to start a podcast. Because like, well, you can publish something, then follow up again. And that's what you were doing. Like, you had these new episodes coming out and it was groundbreaking. Like, you know, you have people on there I couldn't even find. And yeah, I think it's amazing that we've stayed in touch and talked about it. And it's been such a mystery in both of our lives. And, you know, I think this case for both of us is very personal in different ways. And, you know, I'm just really thankful that you want to have me on and talk about it, and I'll do it anytime, man. Like, I think, you know, we could probably do weekly chats about this case. It's so easy and so many rabbit holes to go down.
Well, I don't know about weekly chats, but I feel like we'll be back here again sooner than later. But let's wrap this up. This was very interesting to hear
2 hours.
This.
Wow.
I want to thank you for joining Tyler and I in this discussion surrounding my interview with past Sandi Merriman shelter resident Patty. My biggest takeaway from all this is that again I'm reminded of the far and wide impact Emma has had on those who found her wandering her way into their life. As well, I'm reminded that Emma is perceived so differently by so many. I can only assume Emma is a mix of all the things we've heard, and probably then some. But sadly, as fascinating as her story is, no matter how it's viewed, it seems to only lead to dead ends, at least for now. With that said, if anyone has any information regarding the disappearance of Emma Fillipoff, please contact the Victoria Police Department's non-emergency line at 250-995-7654. And tips can also be provided anonymously via Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Additionally, if you want to publicly share your connection to Emma or your thoughts on this case, please contact me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. I'd be happy to include you in a follow-up episode. And with that, I'll begin wrapping up this episode. But before we part, I'm going to give some thanks. First, I want to thank Patty for her willingness to share some painful and complicated memories. Patty, your comments have filled in several blanks and shined some light on previously obscured parts of Emma's story. And I thank you for doing that. Next, a big shout out to Voxsomnia for contributing the music for this episode. And lastly, a massive thank you to everyone who is listening to Nighttime. Without your interest and your support, Nighttime would be as pointless as it would be possible. But with that said, keeping the show alive is and has always been an uphill battle. So if you want to help take a bit of weight off the show's back, please subscribe to the premium feed. Not only does it keep the show moving, it'll give you more of each topic than you're going to find here on the free feed, as I'm adding exclusive content almost weekly. In the case of this episode, very shortly I'll be sharing a much longer and nearly unedited version of my interview with Patty, exclusively to the premium feed. So for about the price of a cup of coffee, you can help keep this show alive by subscribing to the premium feed at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And with that said, I want to thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Barb, Jamie, and Maddie, thank you for your generous support. And for anyone else who'd like to help support the show but can't do it financially, you can give me a big hand by simply sharing the episodes on social media and letting your friends know about what we're doing here. If any of you have any story ideas or want to give feedback on the show, get me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. As well, I'm on social media. I'm using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I'm live on YouTube most Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sunday nights at 9:15 Eastern. So until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
Somebody somewhere knows something. She didn't just disappear. She couldn't just vanish. Somebody has to know something, Jordan. Somebody has to know something.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte. Copyright Jordan Bonaparte.